So we have a very significant problem, but we can't ignore it. We have to address it. The problem is non-homogeneous distribution, and it's worthwhile to remind ourselves why do we do all this? Why are we here? And why do we go through all this trouble? Well, the testing and procedure has a couple of very important points. We need to protect consumers from consuming the contaminated food. We also need to protect producers. They're producing food, they don't want that rejected as contaminated. So we need to have a way of doing this, and it needs to be defensible. The sampling considerations, I have a number of considerations. The sample size we have already discussed. It needs to be large, but obviously too large samples are not particularly easy to handle, and they become rather expensive. The solution becomes sampling plans laid down in such a way that we can try and produce a balance between the different competing factors. Before we go further, it's worthwhile to... I have time? I'll speed up over a few at the end, I'll leave. It's worthwhile just very roughly, very quickly stating a couple of the definitions, namely the lot, which is an identifiable quantity of the food commodity that you're going to sample. There's a sublot, which is a part of the lot, and which is physically separate from the main lot, or in other words, the lot can be subdivided. There's the incremental samples that you take, and these incremental samples are then added together to form the aggregate sample, which is then the combined total of all the incremental samples from either the lot or the sublot. So that the sampling plan needs to be very specific. And since we are lacking in time, I won't go through all the exact specifics that are required, but it must not be in general terms. You need to say exactly the commodity, how it's packed, and all the details that are required. More details here on this slide. How many increments do you take? What size are those increments? Possibly the sampling device. How are they aggregated? How is it subdivided to be sent to a laboratory? How do you actually do this in physical terms? Well, if you've been involved with food inspection, you've probably seen the type of equipment used. Either you use these hand samplers, probes for sacks, or you can use very long probes for trucks and containers. Either they're manual or they are pneumatic. And if you want to know more about them, I would recommend you go to this website that's shown there, which is from the Canadian Grain Commission, where you'll find a lot of information about various types of probes, their positive and their negative aspects. And if you're faced with trucks and trailers and different types of trucks, they have plans as to how you would put the probes into those trucks to obtain the best sample possible. As you are probably all aware, the European Union has mandated a large number of sampling plans for all the mycotoxins that they regulate, and I've put them here. You can find them on the European Commission website. And those are all well documented. Typical of them would be the sampling of peanuts, which, as far as I know, is the latest one is from March 2010, in which the lot size, as an example, for greater than 15 tons, the incremental size is 200 grams. You take 100 of them, you end up with the aggregate sample of 20 kilograms. The laboratory sample, etc., is then defined in the sampling plan. And what that looks like in practice, very simply, here's a store. It's one of the main warehouses in Rotterdam. That's only a very small portion of it. And here's the sample probe. The food inspector will probe all the various sacks in the lot that has been distributed on the floor, so for ease of access. Sometimes it's necessary to bind up the sack afterwards to prevent contamination. The aggregate sample is then mixed and samples are sent into the lab. So that's in essence what it would look like in practice in the warehouse. And I think to end up with, I would really like to point out that how do we measure the performance characteristics? How these various sampling plans, how do they perform? How can we measure them? And the way we measure them is by generating from analytical data something known as the operating characteristics curve. And very briefly, it's a statistical curve of the nature you see there. It's really an idealized one that I just drew freehand more than perhaps what you'll find in reality. But it shows the general trend that if we look at the mycotoxin level along the x-axis here, and we have an acceptance level, the vertical line here, then if there's no mycotoxin contamination, clearly on the y-axis here is a 100% probability or acceptance probability of 1 that the lots will be accepted. Now, given the problems with sampling, you're not surprised to find that as the mycotoxin level goes down, the acceptance the probability of acceptance comes down, and it tends to take this type of curve. It's just a statistical curve in which the good lots are here on the left, and the bad lots that should be rejected and sent back to the producers are here on the right. But it's not a perfect box. It tails off here. Now, at the top part of this curve, we have what's known as a producer risk. This is a risk that a good lot of food will actually be rejected because of the analysis and the sampling. Whereas on this side, I'll finish now, on this side we have the consumer risk, where high mycotoxin contamination in the food is actually accepted because of the problems in sampling. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll finish off and thank you.
What is your approach? It should be sometimes this contribution is an unacceptable fact, yes, and sometimes this comprehensive sampling is also very expensive. What is the middle?
Yes, well, that's the problem. That's why we have the talk on the issues. You have to do the best you can, and the fact that there's a very large sampling error shouldn't mean that in the lab you're sloppy about how you do the analysis. We have to improve our laboratory results, obviously, of course, but we do have to realize that when we take that result back, we're hoping it's going to have a meaning, and you do the best you can. In my example there of the African food store, we do what we can. We can't take the whole food away to analyze it. The people, they don't have a lot of food, so you can't take a large sample. It becomes another problem. They don't want you to walk off with a large proportion of what they're going to eat in the next few months. So you reach a compromise and hope that it is the best you can do.
Thank you. Thank you. Спасибо. Еще есть вопросы? Мы так отстаем от расписания. Тогда